"27-year-old Maureen Puddy lived in Rye, a seaside town on the Mornington Peninsula in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia, approximately 63 kilometres southwest of Melbourne. In 1972, her 7-year-old son was involved in an accident which had injured his leg and had to be taken by air ambulance to the Austin Hospital in Heidelberg, northeast of Melbourne, a distance of 102 kilometres from Rye. On the evening of July the 5th, Maureen was driving along the Murdoch Road and was on her way home from visiting her son in the hospital, and between the coastal towns of Drumana and Frankston, she spotted a blue light in the sky that seemed to be following her. At first she thought it was an air ambulance and stopped the car to get a better look at it, but on closer inspection could see that it was not a helicopter. As it drew closer, to her surprise, found she was looking at a giant object that was shaped like two saucers on top of one another and about 30.5 metres in diameter. It had no portals or joins and looked very smooth. The object made a low humming sound with a blue light that glowed all over. It appeared to hover about 12 metres above the ground. Maureen quickly jumped back into her car and drove away, but the object appeared to chase her for the next 48 kilometres down the deserted road before shooting off into the distance. She was so concerned that she reported the incident to the police at Drumana. At 9:15 p.m. on the 25th of July 1972, she was driving along the same stretch of road after again visiting her son in hospital and spotted the same blue light, but on this occasion the engine of a Holden car suddenly died and she was unable to drive away to escape. The car was no longer in her control and it was dragged onto the grass verge on the side of the road. The object was now hovering directly above the car, where she and the car were now totally bathed in blue light, and she felt she was in the middle of a vacuum where it was perfectly still and perfectly quiet. It was this moment when she felt a telepathic message being beamed down onto her. She then heard a voice in her head, which initially sounded like it was translating in a foreign tongue. The voice said, "All your tests will be negative." She had no idea what this meant. It then said, "Tell the media and do not panic. We mean no harm." It then said, "You now have control." Maureen then restarted the car and continued on her journey, and the blue light and the feeling of being in a vacuum vanished. After the unusual encounter, she again reported the incident to the police, who she felt had not believed her story. Maureen then contacted the Royal Australian Air Force Base at Laverton, just outside Melbourne. They checked all records on whether any unusual craft or weather balloons had been in the area that night, but told her there was nothing in the sky at that date or time. Maureen attempted to contact the media with her story without any luck. She then decided to contact Judith McGee from the Victorian UFO Research Society. McGee was able to tell her that she was not the only person to witness a strange sighting. Another unusual sighting had also been seen and reported in the sky that night. A 21-year-old engineering manager by the name of Maris Ezegelis reported seeing a blue streak of light coming from the nearby suburb of Mount Waverley. Ezegelis had described it as having an unusually broad meteor trail and was travelling horizontally. When Maureen Puddy heard that someone else had witnessed it, she became excited, as on her very first encounter she had also witnessed a broad blue streak of light that had followed her and hovered above her car. She was now feeling reassured that she was not going crazy. However, Ezegelis had witnessed a blue streak of light at 10 p.m, which means that on her first encounter with the object, Maureen had somehow lost 45 minutes that she was unable to account for. Maureen was also concerned that the alien voice had asked her to speak to the media, and if she did not do what they asked, they may come back. On February the 22nd, 1973, they did return as Maureen was doing the housework. She heard a voice say, "Maureen, come to the meeting place." She first thought that someone was at the front door, but there was nobody there. Throughout the day, she continued to hear the voice over and over. She eventually came to the conclusion that the aliens were using telepathy to plant the voice in her head, and it was obvious that the aliens wanted to talk with her again. Not wishing to meet with the aliens alone, she again contacted UFO investigator Judith McGee along with a colleague called Paul Norman, and they were to make their way to where Maureen's car was dragged onto the grass verge on Murray Road at 8:30 p.m. When Judith McGee first got into Maureen's car, she said she felt a tingling sensation, not unlike a mild electric shock. On the way to Murray Road, Maureen told the investigators that a figure in a silvery suit had suddenly materialised in the back seat before Judith and Paul had got into the car but had abruptly vanished. When they reached their destination, the being in the silvery suited figure reappeared, but this time it was standing on the outside of the car. Again, the two investigators could see nothing. Paul Norman even got out of the car and stood in the exact spot where Maureen claimed the alien was standing. Maureen said that the figure had stepped back to allow Paul Norman to occupy that spot, but the alien then walked away behind some bushes. It was obvious that Maureen was attuned to seeing the alien where the others could not. Why did it not want the others to see it? Maureen then said that the alien figure had then gestured to her to follow him. Judith offered to accompany her, but Maureen gripped the steering wheel tightly, stating that she was not going anywhere. It was at this stage that Maureen Puddy announced that she was being abducted. As the two investigators were looking at Maureen, she began to describe the inside of the UFO and that the beings inside had kidnapped her. She then screamed, "I can't get out, and there are no doors or windows," not realising as she was still sitting next to Judith in the car. The alien then pointed to a strange mushroom in the room, and inside the mushroom was a jelly-like substance that moved about. She said, "He wants me to close my eyes." Maureen then fell into a hypnotic trance, but continued to describe the inside of the ship. Fortunately for Maureen, the trance-like state did not last long, and Maureen said, "He's gone. I can tell that he's gone because it feels different." It took until 1983 for Judith McGee to write up the strange incident in a magazine called the Flying Saucer Review. Although Maureen Puddy had not actually disappeared from view throughout her abduction, Judith was convinced that Maureen had not concocted her ordeal and had been genuinely upset by her terrifying experience. Maureen Puddy later gave a talk organised by the UFO Society about her ordeal to a crowded room, who were intrigued by her experience, so much so that throughout the talk the room was deathly silent.